Welcome inside our Land of 10 studios for yet another edition of Land of 10 Live. Sam Radin, former Michigan Wolverine and 1997 national champion Chris Howard. Looking forward to getting down and dirty with some more Big Ten conversation with you guys. How you doing, Chris?
I'm good, man. Just excited to be here on Land of 10, talk some more Big Ten football.
We will talk some more Big Ten football today, Chris Howard, and we'll add in a little bit Big Ten basketball. And this time of year, we'd be remiss to not include some recruiting conversation as well. So our buddy Tyler Donohue will join us. And speaking of, why don't we let you know what you have in store for you over the next 30 minutes here on Land of 10 Live. We will talk some Big Ten basketball. This is what folks do. They start to turn their attention to basketball around this time of the year, and the Big Ten race is heating up with maybe some unexpected teams at the top of the standings. And speaking of the standings, well, that's part of the State of the Program, and we'll continue our State of the Program series today. We will talk about both Michigan State and Purdue, and as I mentioned, Tyler Donohue will be by. He'll run through the recruiting angle on that with us, as well as help us with our State of the Program for those two schools. And we always want to hear from you. I've got this fancy laptop right here. Each and every show, to get your guys' feedback, head to Land of 10 Live or our Land of 10 Facebook page if you want to sound off. So let's talk a little bit of basketball for a second. First off, what kind of basketball man were you doing your days as a football player? Did you support the basketball team?
Yeah, we supported the basketball team. We would go to the games and support guys. We had classes with some of the basketball players, Mo Taylor, Tractor Taylor, rest in peace. Yeah, I mean, we used to go. We actually used to play them at the CCRB, which, let me tell you, used to be some very intense games when you got Big John Jansen going up against Tractor Trailer in the paint, man. We had some awesome battles.
Wow, that is a scary thought, John Jansen and Tractor Trailer at the CCRB. It's kind of scary for some other folks around the Big Ten to look up and see Ohio State with a new head coach right at the top of the standings there in basketball. You see them up there on your screen, and you see some looks at Ohio State's team this year. I certainly didn't think Ohio State was going to have this kind of a season, or at least not this kind of a start. Did you see this coming?
No, I don't think anyone saw this coming. I mean, I really thought this was a transition year for Ohio State with first-year coach Chris Holtmann coming in. And you got to give him a lot of credit. I mean, he's turned the Buckeye program around. They're 18-4. They're undefeated in Big Ten, and they've got some stars on their team. They've got some guys that are really playing really well. I tell you what, the game that they played against Michigan, they were down 14, 20 points going into the half. They end up winning that game, and ever since then, they've really been an ascending team. And so, again, I don't think anyone saw this coming, but you got to give credit to the coach and the players. They've been playing extremely well, and now they're at the top of the rankings in the Big Ten, along with Purdue.
I want to give some love to Purdue, but you know, I hear you talk about Ohio State beating Michigan, and then in the same breath, you're telling me what kind of a fan you were of the basketball team. You are a consummate journalist, Chris Howard. I mean, there's no bias or favorites here.
That's right.
In this program. Matt Painter's always one of my favorites as far as the head coaching duties that he does with Purdue's basketball team. Seems like he gets more out of less each and every year, and kind of unfortunate for him that when he's had some of his best teams, they've been kind of beleaguered by injuries. But you feel like this is the kind of guy that always does a clean ship, runs a clean program, and they are this season having the kind of season maybe that Purdue fans have been longing for, when they've had even more teams to think that they lose Caleb Swanigan and then they have the kind of season like this that they're having.
Yeah, Matt Painter is again, he's one of those coaches who does it right. He wins the right way. He recruits really well. His players are really disciplined. But, you know, in the past, his team has been really good. But the problem has been consistency. They've lose games that they shouldn't lose. But I think moving forward, again, I think they're 8-0 in the Big Ten. They're playing really well. I think they're ranked somewhere in the top 10 in the country. So Purdue, again, they've been consistent as far as being highly ranked. Now they just need to take the next step and start being even more consistent and winning the Big Ten.
Well, we know we got our State of the Program looks at Michigan State and Purdue coming up in just a few minutes. But before we get to that, do want to spend a little bit of time on some off-field news for college football that doesn't pertain to recruiting. And Tanner Lee, the story this week is he's now going to get an opportunity to showcase himself for the upcoming NFL Combine and Draft. he gets an opportunity now maybe to kind of make a name for himself. And you see right there, he's got a chance to kind of impress some of the scouts as he will have this opportunity in front of him. When it comes to this kind of stuff, what do you make of these kind of showcase events for draft eligible kids?
Well, again, you mentioned it earlier, Sam. I mean, this is, again, another opportunity for Tanner Lee to really impress the coaches, really show what he can do. But this is also an opportunity for Tanner Lee to show some other skills that he may have, because a lot of times in these situations, especially when you're a late replacement like Tanner Lee, they want to see if you can do other things. They want to see if you can play special teams. You could really contribute to the team in other ways. And Tanner Lee is a really good athlete. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Scott Frost. When Scott Frost went to play in some of these bowl games, he played safety. He played special teams. He really wanted to show teams that, hey, listen, I may not be a quote-unquote quarterback, but I can contribute to the team. And this is an opportunity for Tanner Lee to do the same thing.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, you didn't play in the Senior Bowl like Tanner Lee is going to, but you did play in one of these games with Scott Frost, right?
Yeah, I played in the Hula Bowl with Scott Frost, which was the Maui Invitational, which was sponsored by Hooters. That was nice. We had an awesome time. And and again, I really got an opportunity to see Scott Frost, see his work ethic. He was a lot bigger in person than I thought he was, but he went out there with the presence of mind that I need to impress coaches. I need to show that I have more skills than I'm being accredited for. And he played special teams. He played safety. They moved him down into the box, and he really accredited himself really well while he was at the Hula Bowl.
Did you get a chance to kind of truck him a little bit?
I did not. I wish I would have, but I did not have that opportunity.
I know we're short on time, so I think some of our viewers have heard your story before about the Hula Bowl, but just today, in the limited time we have you ever mentioned Hula Bowl without saying Maui and that it was sponsored by Hooters in the same breath? I mean, what better package could you have had than that trip, right?
I have not. I have to say it was one of the better bowls that I played in. I also played in the East-West Shrine Bowl, but the Hula Bowl in Maui was unbelievable.
Mobile?
the Shrine game, I believe it was in somewhere in California. I don't know. It was so long ago.
Yeah, but the same lasting memory. The Maui.
Exactly, but it did not compare to the Hula Bowl because, I mean, again, you get a lot of guys, it's their first trip to the islands, and it was just beautiful. And, of course, again, I will say it again, it was sponsored by Hooters, so you can imagine.
The gift that keeps on giving. All right, we'll resume our State of the Program looks with Michigan State and Purdue coming up in just a few minutes. Do want to remind you, though, that you can check us out each and every week here on our Land of 10 Live Facebook page. You're watching Land of 10 Live for news, insight, and expert analysis about all things Big Ten. Join us each and every week, 6 o'clock Eastern, 5 o'clock Central, or on demand anytime. Let's kick off this week's State of the Program looks with the Michigan State Spartans. Maybe no team in the Big Ten had a better bounce back year. I know Northwestern kind of surprised this year, and we'll spend some time talking about the Wildcats, but Michigan State kind of reasserting itself as a program at the top of the Big Ten. What's the state of their program right now going into this offseason?
Well, given some of the other things that are happening within the program that's been in the media, the Michigan State football program, I mean, like you mentioned, they rebounded from, really a terrible year, 3-9 season, not to mention a terrible offseason. I think they had 12 players in total that ended up leaving the team via transfer or via being kicked off of the team. And most of the people just pretty much wrote Michigan State off. And of course, if you're Coach Mark D'Antonio, you couldn't ask for a better situation to motivate your players. And that's exactly what happened. They used the old disrespect card that Mark D'Antonio likes to use, and that works for them. And they ended up turning their season around. They ended up beating their rival yet again in Michigan, and had an impressive bowl game. So they finished the season with a 10-3 record, extremely well considering where they were just a year ago.
And you look back over some of the individual moments of that season, they had that wacky game with Penn State, and they knocked Penn State kind of off that horse, but then the drubbing at the hands of Ohio State. So there were some ups and downs in there, despite the fact that they won 10 games.
Yeah, definitely some ups and downs for the Michigan State team. But again, if you look at their team was comprised mostly of freshmen and sophomore. Probably 67% of their team were underclassmen. So given that and given how they responded to all the off-season trouble, and again, the departures of very key players. You have to credit Michigan State. They bounced back. No one expected this from them. But again, this played right into the hands of Coach Mark D'Antonio and his team. They like to play the underdog, and this was the perfect underdog setting for Michigan State.
You talk about Coach D'Antonio, and it's interesting that we were talking about Matt Painter in basketball, and I think that John Beilein at Michigan fits into this as well, because these are coaches that always get the most out of the least. And Michigan State's had some fairly high-profile recruits, and we'll talk with Tyler Donohue about this in a few minutes. But Mark D'Antonio is right at the top of that list, football, basketball, you name it, Big Ten and beyond, for getting the most out of his kids, right? And he did that again this season.
Absolutely, and again, that's what Mark D'Antonio does. I mean, even on the recruiting trail, I think currently they may be ranked 26 in the country as far as recruiting class, but again, that's kind of what Mark D'Antonio does. He finds the diamonds in the roughs. He finds the guys with chips on their shoulders. He finds guys that fits his program, and his program is a blue-collar program, and those are the kind of guys that he goes after. So, you know, we talk about five-star athletes. We talk about, you know, Alabama's recruiting class and Ohio State's recruiting class, but Mark D'Antonio does more with less, and that's been a staple of his career.
If I'm not mistaken right now, here I go back to the Michigan Needle again, but is it not 6 out of the past 7 that Michigan State has won against Michigan in football, which again, you talk about recruiting rankings and more for less, that's a pretty good testament to what Mark D'Antonio has done for that Michigan State program.
Absolutely. I mean, you go back and look at his recruiting classes. I only think one of those recruiting classes were actually a top 10, maybe top 15 recruiting class. And again, most of those players that he recruited into that 2016 recruiting class ended up being expelled for various reasons. So he didn't even have those kids going into the 2017 season, and look what he was able to do with the team that he ended up kind of pulling together.
Just real quick before we move on to talk about the state of the program at Purdue, and remember Tyler Donohue is going to join us in about 5 minutes or so, and he'll spend some time with us on this topic as well. You're remiss to not mention kind of the elephant in the room when it comes to Michigan State and talk about Larry Nassar and the scandal that that's become. And obviously you don't want to trivialize the victims of that by talking about its impact in maybe a roundabout way on kids and recruiting and what, but it is part of the state of the program at Michigan State, is it not? I mean, this is part of what's going on, and you just wonder if that's something maybe that could be used as negative recruiting, or could there be any repercussions for the athletic department as a whole because of the scandal that's gone on there?
Well, you know, yeah, it definitely could be used. It definitely could be used against Michigan State. It definitely could be used as negative recruiting. But you know, you try to look at a situation like this and you try to remove the rivalry from it. You want to remove that from it because, again, these are victims that are involved in this case, and you don't want to trivialize it like you said. But you have to look at it because that is part of the college culture. That is part of you being safe on campus. Those are the things that you look for when you're choosing a school. So it can be used against Michigan State. Listen, I love Mark D'Antonio. I think he's a great coach. I think what he's done for the program has been outstanding. But me personally, I would like to see him take more of a firm stance on what's happening at Michigan State.
Well, before we switch the page to Purdue, what I would say is this. On the field, I think Michigan State it's not all the way up there maybe where it was a couple of years ago under Cook as the quarterback, but it's pretty close on the field as far as how highly regarded the state of the program is for Michigan State. But when you look at the bigger picture, maybe that knocks it down a notch or so. Is that fair? Yeah,
I think that's a fair assessment. I think they're going through exactly what happened with Penn State. I think they're feeling that same thing. So, but listen, this is a situation that's very touchy topic for a lot of people, and the only thing that you can hope for and pray for is for the victims in this case.
Well said. All right, let's talk about Purdue and the state of the program there. Not too much off-the-field negativity to report, and the on-the-field returns for Jeff Brom in his first season at Purdue, in my opinion, are fantastic. To do things like play Michigan as close as they did, and to win as many conference games as they did, to become bowl eligible, to beat Arizona in a bowl game, I think the state of the program for Purdue is just about as high as for any of the teams that we'll cover in the league, based on where the expectations were to what the results are right now.
Yeah, I mean, again, Jeff Brom has done an excellent job. I mean, their record may not reflect what he's been able to do. They were 6-6 overall, but again, they hadn't been to a bowl game since 2012. They go to the Foster Farms Bowl. They beat Arizona, like you said. And I mean, if you're a Purdue fan, you have to be excited with where the direction of the program is going. And if you really look at it, Purdue probably should have had 8 wins on the season. They had a couple close losses to Nebraska, and I can't remember the other game that they lost to. But again, those 2 combined losses were less than 4 points. So you have to be excited if you're a Purdue fan with what Jeff Brom has been able to do. If Brom can continue to recruit well, if he can recruit the state of Indiana well, he'll do well at the Purdue program.
Well, Tyler Donohue joined us in just a few minutes. He'll talk about the recruiting start that Purdue is off to this year in advance of National Signing Day. I wonder if it's fair to say this, though. What's the threshold for Purdue when you look at the improvements they've made under Jeff Brom? I don't think anyone thought either of the quarterbacks that they had under center last year could deliver the kind of impact that they did, and Jeff Brom obviously is kind of a whisperer for quarterbacks. But how far can they take this? Can this team compete to probably get in the mix or potentially get in the mix, I should say, for a Big Ten championship game? Or now are we beyond what's a realistic expectation?
I think we're a little bit beyond the realistic expectation. Again, listen, they went 6-6 on the season. Again, I think they could have easily had an 8-win season had they not lost those 2 really close games. But again, listen, Jeff Brom came into a mess. Purdue was an absolute mess, especially on the offensive side of the ball. So now he has to take the next step, and that's recruiting the state of Indiana, getting guys like Michigan was able to go in and get Chris Evans. Michigan was able to go in Indiana and get Brandon Peters. If Jeff Brom can keep guys like that in Indiana, believe in the program, believe in the message, he can turn that program around, but it's going to take some time.
Now, you mark my words right now, for what it's worth, right? Wisconsin could fall off a little bit. We don't know exactly on the field what Nebraska's going to do. We're talking about the Big Ten West, man. Stranger things have happened. I mean, Drew Brees could walk back through that door. I would never say never on the chance of Purdue competing for the notion to go to a Big Ten championship game.
Well, I'm not saying they can't. I'm just saying it might take some time.
All right, we'll find out how that time could unfold as we welcome in our recruiting analyst in just a couple of seconds. But do want to remind you that each and every week at about this time, you can check us out on our Land of 10 Live Facebook page and on landof10live.com for news, insight, and expert analysis about all things Big Ten. Join us for Land of 10 Live each and every week, 6 o'clock Eastern, 5 o'clock Central, or on demand anytime. All right, here's Tyler Donohue. He's becoming a regular staple of the program here this time of the season as we get full-fledged into recruiting. How about that notion, Tyler? Let's stick on Purdue for a couple seconds before we switch back over to Michigan State. What kind of an impact could Jeff Brom have on the recruiting trail for Purdue to kind of maybe step it into the upper echelon there of the Big Ten West?
During the early signing period, they're on track for their first top 60 finish since 2010. That's right, top 60 recruiting class. They're right now comfortably inside the top 50. So we want to talk about the on-field success in a hurry. Look what Jeff Brom's done on the recruiting trail. We're talking about kind of uncharted territory for Purdue in terms of roster building. So that's good news for them. And I got some news about where they sit in the Big Ten. I know they're number 11 right now. But the gap between them and a spot in the top 5 is actually about half the size of the gap between number 2 Penn State and number 3 Michigan right now when you look at composite points. So they are right there in that mix with a lot of different Big Ten West teams, you know, kind of knocking on that door, and anyone could make a leap there. So I think Purdue, what they've done really well is bringing in some offensive firepower. They've got the strong quarterback play last year, although both quarterbacks finished the season injured. They've got a quarterback coming in who I really like, Jack Plummer out of Arizona. Good production overall from Purdue's quarterbacks. Maybe he's the next step, 7,000 passing yards the past 3 years. And then a couple wide receivers I like, Ahmad Anderson out of Staten Island, New York. He was committed to Rutgers for a while. This is a pretty dynamic receiver. has that wiggle. Intermediate pass completions can turn into like drive-defining gains with the way he can make guys miss. And then the other guy, kind of a surprise. He backed out of his commitment from Texas one day before the early signing period. Rondell Moore ends up committing to Purdue on January 6th. He is the 4-star recruit in this class. And, he's a diminutive guy. He's 5'9", but I'll tell you what, 4.35 speed in the 40-yard dash. That'll make up for a lack of height.
That's appreciate you coming on, Tyler. Let me ask you about Purdue's recruiting. What does Purdue need to do to really start tackling the in-state recruits? What do they need to do to really start keeping guys like Chris Evans, Brandon Peters in-state to play for Purdue? What does Jeff Brom need to do to convince those guys that they need to stay home?
Yeah, I mean, they've got to swat away the best of the Big Ten Conference that keeps reaching in and plucking players away. I mean, I think really the only way you do that is you beat those teams. It's going to take more than just beating Indiana Hoosiers. They're going to have to contend. We saw them hang very tough with Wisconsin this year, and we saw them really give Louisville a fight earlier in the year. I think that's what's going to cure all. I mean, Jeff Brom can point to a 7-win season, which I said it's the second winning season in 10-year span. So you can talk about, I think what you saw right now is come to us, be part of the foundation of what we're building. We want to go from 7 wins to double-digit wins during the time you're here. Represent your home state. Come make Purdue, right there on the national scene again, and bring us to glory. And that's what you sell the local kids. You give them an opportunity to not just be a part of your roster, but to be part of a legacy.
Hey, Tyler, I want to turn the page and switch gears here to talk about Michigan State. By the way, if we ever need further proof, I mean, this guy, Tyler Donohue, is dropping names in Purdue recruiting like nobody's business. But let's talk about Michigan State a little bit. We did talk about Mark D'Antonio and the fact that he's just not bringing in and hasn't brought in these nationally ranked classes, but always kind of gets the most out of the least. Is that a style that he has as far as the kids that he's picking out, or is that kind of by necessity based on who winds up committing?
Yeah, I don't, what the star ratings say on National Signing Day, I always say get those guys one semester on campus with that coaching staff in East Lansing. Suddenly they're 3 stars, about half of them become 4 stars. I don't know what it is. Them in Iowa, they have a way about them. But I just think for Michigan State, the most important thing is being strong in Detroit, winning key battles against Ohio State and Michigan. And I mean, they're always kind of right there on the fringe of a top 25 recruiting class. Sometimes they're inside of it, and, somewhere between 20 and 25. Right now, they're right outside. I think with them, they win games with whoever is on that roster. I know last year, 2016, was a down season, but they bounced back in such a big way with a really strong 2017 campaign. And I mean, ultimately, I just don't think Michigan State fans have come to expect the team is going to go out and sign a top 10 class. And clearly, they don't necessarily need to do that. I just think as long as they're in that top 30 to 35 range where they should finish this year, they're in good shape. And again, if you look at the list here, starting with Kalon Gervin, doing good stuff in the home state, one of the top players. I think he actually finished the year in composite rankings #1 in the state of Michigan. He's a big cornerback from Cass Technical High School, and if you know Michigan recruiting, you got to win over players who go to Cass Technical School. That's where Donovan Peoples-Jones was a star. A lot of players come out of there. And then they got a couple guys from Ohio. We always see Michigan reach into the northern part of Ohio. This year, 2 teammates, tight end Trenton Gillison, defensive back Xavier Henderson, both out of Pickerington Central High School in Ohio. They could be early impact players as well. And lastly, I'll give you one more name, an in-state quarterback, Theo Day. Reminds me a lot of Brian Lewerke, and I think Brian Lewerke has a chance to be one of the top 2019 NFL draft prospects at quarterback. Natural mechanics, consistent stature, and composure in the pocket. And he's a guy to me that has that kind of calm method of leadership. I think he's a little bit more of a physical advantage than Lewerke did coming out of high school. So maybe he is the next man up at quarterback out of Dearborn, Michigan.
Tyler, before we switch gears here and talk about more of the bigger stories within the entire conference, I was going to just kind of snarkily point out that Chris Howard well knows Cass Tech in Detroit because Clarence Williams was battling you for some reps out of that school. But then you make the statement about Lewerke and the type of draft prospect that he is, and between that and me and Purdue and the Big Ten West, I mean, we're not holding back on this show, Chris Howard. I mean, you know, if you're not putting it up big, you better not come play with the big dogs here on Landed 10 Live. Let's switch gears to this, though, Tyler, while we have you. We talked a little bit before about the impact maybe that Nebraska would see right away with the recruiting trail, and we're starting to see that now in the state of Florida already. I guess this shouldn't be a surprise with what we kind of figured would be happening with the direction the program's going in right now, right?
Well, when you win a national championship with the state of Florida like Scott Frost did, you should be able to recruit. I mean, well, we call him a national champion or what? I'm just going to say that he should be able to recruit Florida pretty darn well after what he did at Central Florida. And looking at the last few weeks, he's doing that. We talked about it last week. Some of the targets, two of those guys I mentioned have committed, one of them being Dominic Watt, wide receiver out of Hollywood, Florida. And they keep coming. That was last week, and the same day they got Miles Jones, who's a guy who could play cornerback. He could play slot receiver out of American Heritage High School, one of the premier programs in the Fort Lauderdale area. And then they go down once again earlier this week, just yesterday with Braxton Clark, a cornerback from Orlando. And obviously at 6'3", that's bringing size to your secondary. And there's no surprise here. When you see these kind of coaching changes, especially when the coach has that kind of success in a region, you think that for at least this recruiting cycle and probably into the 2019 recruiting cycle, Scott Frost should be in very good position to pluck significant talent out of the Sunshine State. And we know Nebraska likes to tout itself as being a team that can go to California, go to Texas, and get players. But when you're doing it in Florida on a consistent basis, that's a game changer. Typically, that you're going to bring in some serious athleticism, some speed, and that's good news as Nebraska really starts to rebuild and retool its roster.
Tyler, I want to talk to you a little bit about some Buckeyes recruiting. My favorite part of this segment, obviously. Obviously, they had a good Friday. They got a kid out of Jersey, one of the top defensive tackles in the country. Michigan was in the mix. I believe at one point Michigan believed that they had a slight lead advantage over Ohio State. But obviously a lot of things start to happen. You start talking about Greg Madison possibly retiring, Jim Harbaugh, the rumors of the NFL. Do you think any of those stories had any impact on Friday choosing Ohio State?
So you're telling me that retirement rumors helped Ohio State this time around? Because that would be a nice change of pace for them here in the 2018 recruiting cycle. I mean, with Tyler Friday, for me, I just think the perception with him was he kind of focused in late. He talked about Michigan very strongly early in the process, Chris, and he did the same thing with Penn State. And suddenly in November, all of a sudden he pops up. He drops the top 5 list, has Miami and UCLA on it too. But for me, Ohio State versus Michigan in this kind of scenario, I would think with the New Jersey guy, based on recent history, yeah, Michigan should have a good shot. Rashawn Gary going there most recently, and he's in that same parochial area from North Jersey that Rashawn starred in, and some of the other guys have gotten, whether it's Bill Peppers and what have you. But Ohio State ultimately, I think Larry Johnson, he is such a difference maker with these guys, especially when they get them on campus or when they visited them in school. Alabama is the team that made the push here, from my understanding. They're the team that really made Tyler think. And I don't think it was Michigan number 2 at the end. I think it was Alabama number 2 at the end of this whole thing. Penn State was always involved, but I think because they brought in several interior defensive linemen to the class during the summer, I think he maybe fell a little bit out of the pack of their main concentration. Not going to say they stopped recruiting him, but a really nice get for Ohio State. And they continue to stockpile these defensive linemen for Larry Johnson. And Tyler Friday's a guy, 265 pounds. I've witnessed him run a sub-5 in the 40-yard dash, so he brings a lot of athleticism. He's not just strictly an interior guy. Depending on what you need to do in a situational, you can send this guy to the perimeter if you need to.
All right, Tyler, we got to run. We'll catch up with you again next week, and do want to spend some time with you. We didn't get a chance to ask you about any negative recruiting stories coming out of Michigan State and the Larry Nassar scandal. Time flies when you're having fun.
Absolutely, man.
We're out of time for today. We'll save your comments from our Atlanta 10 Live Facebook page for next week. And state of the program, hot off the press next week, Nebraska and Illinois.
All right.
Look forward to your thoughts on that. Thanks to everybody on this side of the glass for helping make this thing possible. Remember, join us anytime on demand at our Atlanta 10 Live Facebook page.